So in this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to dye synthetic fabric. I'll be using Rit Dye for synthetics in the colors chocolate brown and the colors sandstone. I'm using two colors to help me create the perfect nude. You're also going to need safety pins and some string. And you're going to need the pieces that you dye, obviously. I like to dye my pieces before I begin sewing and constructing them, just in case I mess up and I have to re-dye and start the process over. You're also going to need a stove, and you're going to need a large pot. Now you're going to want to use a pot that you don't plan on using to cook ever again, because this dye is not safe and you don't want to mix any chemicals with food that you prepare. I like to take the lid and put it on my pot and boil with the lid on the pot, because I feel like my water boils faster that way, and especially since it's a lot of water and a big pot, it might take a while to actually boil. Now, once you're done getting your pot all set up, you're going to go back to your fabric pieces and you're going to take your safety pins and you're going to untie your string if it's tied up. And basically, I'm going to safety pin my fabric, and then I'm going to stick the safety pins onto the string so that my fabric is hanging on the string. And basically, why I'm doing this is because when you're dyeing the fabric, you don't want to just drop the fabric in and then have to fish it out, because the longer the fabric is in there, the more color it's going to take and the darker it's going to be. So you want to be able to easily take the fabric in and out of the pot, and putting it on a string makes it so much easier to do that, because you kind of have to be quick with this dye. It dyes really fast, so this just makes things easier. Once you're done hanging everything on the string, you're actually going to take the fabric to a sink. You're going to fill the sink up with hot water, as hot as the water will come out. The hotter the better. And you're basically just going to sit that fabric into the sink and let it soak. You want it to be totally wet so that when you put it in the dye doesn't go through the fabric unevenly and dye one part faster than another. So when it's wet, it makes that process better. Now, after you've done that with your fabric, you're going to go back to your boiling water and you're going to take your dye and you're going to make sure that they're shaken up really well so that they haven't separated from each other. And then you're going to pour a little bit in. Now, if you read the instructions on the bottle, it's going to tell you that you need to use the whole bottle, but that just depends on how much fabric you're using. Since I'm using small pieces here, I don't need to use the whole bottle, and I'm not trying to achieve the full color that's in the bottle. So I'm just gonna pour a little bit in, and this is the part where you kind of experiment. You pour a little bit in at a time. Don't pour too much, pour a little, because if it's too light, you can always go a little bit darker, but once you go too dark, there's no reversing that. So after you pour in your dye, you're going to stir it up with a utensil that you don't use to eat. And then I'm going to take a piece of test fabric and I'm going to dip it in there. Now, I think about 2 minutes had passed and I used a lot of the chocolate brown dye. And only 2 minutes had passed and I noticed that it was already too dark of a brown. So basically what I did here is I took it out. And I decided that I needed to make the dye a little bit lighter, so I took a little bit more of the sand tone and I poured it in there. Well, not a little bit more, a lot more. And I poured it in there, and then I mixed it back up, and now I'm going to get ready to dye the other end of the fabric and see if I can get a better color. So now I'm going to dip that in there, and I'm only going to keep it in for like maybe 30 seconds, and it dyes really quick. And then you're going to notice, you're going to see one end is lighter and the other end is really dark, and the middle hasn't been dyed at all, so it's the natural color, and you're going to see the difference. Now, keep in mind that the fabric is wet, and once it dries, it's not going to be the same color. It's going to be much lighter. So I decided that the color wasn't exactly as dark as I needed it to be, so I'm going to put it in there for a little bit longer. And I think all in all, I left the fabric in there for maybe 2 minutes and it was the right color. But you also need to keep in mind, the more fabric you dye, the more dye it's going to soak up and the more dye it's going to need to get a certain color. And you want to keep your eye on it. So after I decided that I got the right color, I went and grabbed my fabric pieces and I dunked it in there. Now I kind of have an idea of how long it needs to stay in and what it'll look like when it's the right color. So the process is really quick. I think it was in here for a matter of like 3 or 4 minutes and it got the color that I needed it to. So then I just went ahead and took it out and I rinsed it out. And if you look to your right, you'll see the pieces that I dyed. They came out the right color that I needed them to, a caramel kind of brown. And then you'll see the original fabric to your left, and it's much lighter. So that's basically how you dye the fabric. It does take a little bit of experimenting to get the right color, but it's pretty simple and pretty quick. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comment section, and thanks for watching.